This is the largest exhibition of David Armstrong's work ever, and the first in an institution. And it came about because, well, David was a friend of mine and yours, and he passed away 10 years ago, and all of his work was left in a barn in kind of unceremoniously stored and in terrible condition in Massachusetts. And so we brought everything to my studio to try to stabilize things, figure out what existed, and organize them. And in the end, we discovered hundreds of photos, hundreds of contact sheets, negatives, many that had never been published or exhibited. So this is the first, I hope, of many exhibitions kind of reintroducing David's work in the world. And the scope is early 70s, from when he was a student in Boston to, I think we're around mid-90s. And almost all black and white. There's a series of color photos that are on 2 screens from slides that he took in the late 70s, early 80s.
Well, I'm part of the early period of time with David because I went to the Boston Museum School with him, and that's where we met in '75. And this was the period where he took most of the pictures in the show, or in the '70s. When he and the Boston School, there were 5 or 6 of photographers who were really relevant at that time, and definitely wild, and lived kind of underground, and spent a lot of time traveling with them and seeing them take these pictures that you see here. So a lot of the faces are familiar, but David was pretty much my memory of everything in those days. So we would have discussions, and suddenly he would be bringing up somebody. So a lot of these pictures, I saw him in the studio printing at the Boston Museum School. There was a dark room downstairs, and it was kind of the invention of color photography, which we don't have in this show except for in the slides, but it was a very raw and kind of active photo department at the museum school. And then we stayed friends forever, till he died. And luckily, Wade and the studio took over archiving this work, because it would be quite a feat to do on my own.
The interesting thing, I think, about the show, too, is because we believe David printed almost all of these photos himself. They're early. Later, he preferred to work with a darkroom and someone to print the photos with him. But his hands were on all of these, and we decided to treat them as objects, historical objects, and not frame them in a way that concealed the history of the paper, how they were handled or mishandled.
Very mishandled.
And so it's also interesting to see, I think, right now in relation to photography, just seeing the materiality of the print itself. And I think that will be a revelation for people. And I was shocked at how many people David knew and were in his life, because all of this is long before I met him in the 90s. And there is, I imagine these were like troubled times. There was a lot of drug use, a lot of people were dying of AIDS. It wasn't the easiest of times, and yet he seemed to take incredibly beautiful photos of everyone in being calm, and he didn't take the angst and put them in the photos. So I found that remarkable too.
It's also amazing to see what they've done in the archives, because I know most of these photographs I can recognize, but then there was so much new, so many new pictures that I'd never seen. Obviously the contact sheets are just phenomenal that they found, and so it's such a revelation to revisit these moments and see them here. It's magical, makes some of us cry, but incredibly an amazing effort from the archives.
Yeah. Speaking of the contact sheets, a couple images kind of popped out at me, and maybe you can zoom in later, but there are moments where you see like the image that he selected, but then also kind of the film around it in the life in motion, as well as there's some great ones where you can see him taking a photo of his friend, like George Stoll, and then the camera gets he hands George the camera, obviously, and there are all these pictures of David, and it's kind of shocking to see him appear in his own contact sheets.
All the cameras in those periods of time in that group of people were held together by electrical tape. They were falling apart. They held flashes up here to take your picture. I mean, maybe it seems like maybe they do that still, but then it was how they took pictures with broken cameras.
Yeah.
Here they are.
Here they are.
So it all started about 9 years ago when Wade asked me if I could help him organize his friend's estate. David had passed away a year prior in 2014, and everyone was trying to figure out what to do with the holdings. So I got in a van and went up to his property in the Berkshires, and we collected everything there and brought it back to Wade's studio in Brooklyn and just started to look at all of the materials. We were using a small office where we had boxes piled up, and it was like a maze through the walls of the storage bins that he had, all these plastic storage bins. Everything was thrown together in a pile, so you had negatives and film that weren't labeled or numbered in any way, together with other objects of other belongings of his. And sometimes we found other surprises in the materials as well. Since it was stored in a barn, there would be an occasion where we had come across a nest or chestnuts that had been chewed, and we had to pull everything out of the boxes and try and make sense of everything. We also had to try to figure out a framework of organization, and that actually happened in several different passes over time. And we relied heavily on the people around David that knew him and cared for his work and his legacy and wanted to help us organize everything. So we ended up inviting as many people as we could think of who knew him, who might know something about this time and know who the people in the images are. And over the last 9 years, still up into weeks before we hung this show, we've been reaching out to the people who remain living today, who are part of David's community, to help identify all of the people in the images. So that's been, to me, one of the most enjoyable parts of the process, is tapping into this constellation of artists and musicians and poets that, and just friends around David who were alive at the time and have these amazing stories about him and about each other. So, and one of the tools actually that we used to get information, it was kind of a surprise to us at some point when we decided that we wanted to let people know that there was a process underway, just so that the larger community around David could trust that we were taking care of it. we started an Instagram account just to show what we were archiving. And as we started posting images, we started learning about the people in the images we were sharing. People, just in an open source way, we were collecting data. And sometimes we would post an image and say this person is unidentified, and then suddenly somebody would pipe up in the comments and say, well, that's me. And so we were able to find a lot of people and give titles to the images that way. And our direct message in that account is full of amazing stories about that time and about the context of the photograph that was taken. We started the effort 9 years ago, and the more that I work with and learn about other artists' archives, the more I realize that that is just the time that it sometimes takes. With a photography archive especially, we have, I believe the rough estimate is around 250,000 negatives that we hold apart from other objects and put into an order and stabilized in the archive. And then the contact sheets themselves, we have tens of thousands of them that correspond with the negatives, and the printed images close to 10,000. So it was a huge undertaking, but we pieced together a lot of help. The thing that's enabled me to work here for so long is I think it's a very unique situation. David knew exactly who to ask to help take care of his estate and his legacy. He asked his friends to be the executors of his estate, and he asked Wade to curate the show, his first posthumous exhibition. And I think it's rare that you have a situation where people are so ready and willing to pool resources toward an effort like this. And it allowed us to take the time that it needed, the 9 years that we actually required to get to this point. And I think a lot of other estates and archives are cobbling together a process one grant at a time, and we found ourselves actually just able to continue moving forward with each phase of this process. So I would say that Wade had no idea what it meant. None of us knew what it meant when we said, okay, well, let's just get everything together under one roof and start to look through it and see what is involved. Nobody had any idea that we'd be standing here 10 years later, 9 years later, and actually having a show. Maybe I can talk a little bit about what you don't see here and what is a part of a larger archive, but one of the most maybe moving processes for me was actually going through, we have years and years of correspondence, letters that came to David from his loved ones that he saved. And one of the things that is apparent as you read through all of the letters is how everybody who knew and loved David and wrote to him had this sense that their relationship with David was the most special. And I think we hear from people who knew him then that he had a way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room, the most important person in the world. And I think that's really, that's something that's always amazed me as we've talked to people and pulled together oral histories about that time, as we've read through the letters that we've read to David, just these gushing love letters asking, are you thinking about me? We don't have any of the letters that he wrote back, or even know if he did write back, but it's amazing to see the way that people expressed love to him. When I went to David's home, I witnessed how he maybe wasn't so precious about the way that he kept his belongings, and that was certainly true for the way that he kept his photography holdings as well. But I think it's amazing that he seemed to have kept everything nonetheless. He wasn't precious about any one given object, but he still managed to hold on to everything. And so I think it's actually quite remarkable that, for instance, that we have all of the contact sheets that we do, dating back to 1972, and that we also have the negatives. It took a long time to find a match to a match to a match, a negative to a contact sheet to a print, but we did. And so I think that's it's incredible that all of the places he moved to throughout his young life and the places he settled in his older age, that he was able to hang on to everything is kind of amazing.